All right, well, welcome to Trio. Today we are, as we have all learned recently of the passing of Gene Hackman. This got me and the three of us who have too much time on our hands, really thinking about Gene and some of the many movies, many great movies that he starred in. So we wanted to spend some time talking about him, his movies, and his roles. And before we, really dive into the specific movies, I just, was thinking as I heard the news about Gene. Now, Gene hasn't been making movies for a while. He's been
A few
out of the
years.
limelight. He retired a while ago, so we weren't looking forward to more movies. But he certainly had plenty to look back upon. And I thought back to some of his earliest movies. The first movie that I can remember watching that he was in was Bonnie and Clyde, and which was a while ago. I didn't see it in the theaters, but I can remember as a child watching that on TV. Probably rapidly followed by the
I,
Poseidon Adventure.
I think, Mark, that as boys, we actually saw that at the outdoor theater.
We
I can remember seeing
Bonnie and
that
Clyde or the Poseidon Adventure?
Bonnie and Clyde. I mean,
Okay.
it was. I think it was something that our parents wanted to see, and that it was at doing. They weren't able. They. I don't think they could afford going out to. My folks weren't rolling in the dough when Mark and I were small, and I think they waited until it got to the outdoor circuit after we'd moved up to Appleton, and watched it there because I can remember it at the outdoor theater. I can still remember the blood on Faye Dunaway's back at the end where they get shot. So sorry to interrupt, but I believe we saw it at the
no,
outdoor theater.
and we may have, and I'll tell you, I don't really remember that myself. And now you start to talk about it, and it comes a little bit more back into focus. Just for all, Mike has a much clearer memory of some of the earliest days. I can actually remember we were at our grandparents' place in Arkansas, and Bonnie and Clyde was on television. It was the movie, and at the same time, Grandma was trying to get us to do some painting, and she kept calling us back to do some work to get ready to do this painting. And I can remember really rushing through it because I wanted to get back and be watching the movie. But the bottom line, regardless of the form, is that was a very early age, and movies that were we certainly saw as more adult movies, more serious movies than whatever watching the Wizard of Oz or these types of movies on TV. Same thing with Poseidon Adventure. The types of things that maybe mom and dad didn't really want us watching when we were super young, but certainly memorable movies from our childhood. And for myself, that continued through all the way up until his latest movies right after the turn of the century, and we're moving into the early 2000s, and some of his last movies there that I still anticipated and enjoyed watching. I thought that his ability to play flawed characters was probably the thing that really stuck out to me. And I don't mean that he was always playing bad characters. He was playing heroic, positive characters, but was able to show some of the weaknesses or uncertainties that those people had as good as anybody out there. And I guess the one of the more recent roles that comes to mind with me in thinking about Gene Hackman was his role in the movie Crimson Tide, when he's this powerful captain figure, and at the points when he's being questioned, and you can tell the points where he's actually uncertain about what he should do, or that he's decided he needs to give Denzel Washington this out, otherwise he's going to find himself in trouble. And there's parts of the movie where he's scratching his head, he removes his hat, and he just does an amazing job of trying to work through some of the conflict. And I saw that in a number of his roles, that ability to show frustration, indecision, fear about what he's doing, as well as all the other aspects of his role. So that was me. How about you, Andrew? What kind of went through your mind over the last couple of weeks as we've heard this news?
But the tragic details of his death, which was just pathetically sad, the way that, his wife passed and then he was stuck in the house with dementia, unable to do anything for himself or for her, that was sad. The first movie I remember seeing him in was The Poseidon Adventure. My father took me and my friend Paul Bickler to the theater to watch The Poseidon Adventure, and I remember seeing him. I did not see Bonnie and Clyde until after I'd seen The Poseidon Adventure. Although he was very good in that. After that, I mean, he just had such a fantastic career. I mean, it was just, I'm not gonna say one good movie after another because he did make a few bad movies along the way, but one good performance after another.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, once he was established, which was The French Connection, I would say. Poseidon Adventure is just a disaster movie, but French Connection, I think, really established him as a great actor, as someone, like you said, playing the good guy who is deeply flawed.
Mm-hmm.
He just cranked out so many great movies after that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And my first, I mean, we saw Bonnie and Clyde was the first one that I saw, but I didn't necessarily recognize him as Gene Hackman. He was Clyde's brother. And the first, like Andrew, the first movie where I really, it was the Poseidon Adventure, where I, took note of Gene Hackman. That's Gene Hackman, and saw that at the theater, not the outdoor theater, but that was just going to the theater, and that's one of the, quintessential disaster movies. I mean, disaster movies being kind of part of the '70s kitsch. And it was good, and he played a good character. I didn't see The French Connection until later. I mean, I was an adult before I ever saw The French Connection. I think I actually read the book. I actually read the book, The French Connection, before I saw the film. But he, I agree that obviously The French Connection was what really put him on the map permanently as an actor. But he had been nominated for 2 Academy Awards before The French Connection, in Best Supporting Actor in Bonnie and Clyde, which was 1967 is when that came out. And then the movie I Never Sang for My Father, he was also nominated for an award.
Yes.
And I didn't see that film until I was an adult. And actually, my wife and I have watched it since Gene Hackman passed. And very different character in that movie than either Bonnie and Clyde or The French Connection. I mean, not that, I mean, Gene Hackman he could play a good tough guy, but he wasn't necessarily the dreamboat, leading man. He never would have gotten considered for James Bond. I mean, he wasn't that, he didn't play that kind of character. But a lot of
a great Felix.
a lot of versatility in what he could do. And
yes,
going through movies over the course of his career, one of my favorites is his portrayal of General Sosabowski in A Bridge Too Far. Hoosiers, I mean, just a classic sports movie. In The Firm, I'm a retired attorney. And I never worked in a law firm anything like a big Memphis law firm with 41 lawyers, but I thought he did a good job in that, of playing a flawed and conflicted character. Crimson Tide was I thought an excellent movie and an excellent performance for some of the reasons, Mark, that you referred to. As an adult, I saw the movie The Conversation, which I think is one of his best performances as an actor, and one of the most interesting characters that he ever played. And towards the end, the movie Enemy of the State with Will Smith, the type of character that he played in that film was very similar to the character he played in The Conversation. In many ways. I mean, it was a different type of person, not quite as
Hmm.
nerdy and introspective, but the same kind of person. Um, uh, a film you don't hear about in the current discussion is a film from the early 2000s called Heist, which
Oh yeah.
was, I
Hmm.
mean, nothing particular. I mean, self-explanatory. It was kind of a heist movie, but a screenplay by David Mamet, who he comes up with interesting dialogue
Hmm.
for his characters, and in the early 2000s, the Royal Tenenbaums, very interesting role for him. And he was still, that was only a few years before his last film,
Hmm.
which probably around like 2004, I believe, was his last film he acted in. And he got rave reviews for that, for the quality of his acting and the unique character in that film. So uh, uh, he was for basically the entirety of my film watching life up until he retired. He was part of it. He was a
Hmm.
big star. That was the name Gene Hackman. I can recall knowing about as long as I've been watching movies,
Sure.
with the
Well,
consciousness of who's acting in them.
well, and I mean, part of that comes from the longevity and how prolific that he was in these roles throughout this time. I mean, he cranked out a lot of movies, and part of being able to do that was, although he was the leading man, the star in many of these movies, I'd agree with you. There were a number of types of leading man roles that Gene Hackman just wasn't going to play, right? Gene Hackman is not a Tom Cruise leading man. He's a different type of character.
He's got
Can
talent.
Yes, absolutely. And that also, though, it wasn't his looks that were getting him the role.
No.
And that type of, it's almost that he fits more in the character actor type of lane, even though he was the star and the blockbuster star in some very big and well regarded films. But his ability to move back and forth from that major leading the central character role back to a much more subordinated character that probably whose role was so small they wouldn't even be considered for as a supporting actor type role, almost more of a more minor character, and his ability to do well in those roles, and then 6 months later he's out with a movie where he's the main star. And I think that he did a lot of that through his life, and in some cases, and we'll talk a little bit about this today. There's a big difference between the movie and the role. And I think that Gene Hackman was in a number of great movies. Some where he was the primary role in that movie, and others where he was in a smaller role. And he was in some not so good movies. Same mixture of items, but certainly a lot of memorable movies as we move around. Sure.
Okay, building on what you said about him being sort of a character actor, he had character actor looks with leading man talent.
Absolutely, absolutely. That I think is a great way to do it, and I think that a lot of us have talked about that really reflected in his ability to play this imperfect hero role, as well as a villain type role as
Well,
as
yeah.
well, very well through
We could
these.
He could carry a film as a leading man without being the dreamboat type character that
Oh,
is
right.
that is
Absolutely.
sometimes a leading man. I think the leading man character actor sort of comparison or connection is a excellent kind of way to sum up his
Sure.
unique ability as an actor.
And also they're creating very realistic characters. The it doesn't have that supermodel look. Doesn't have this built up, abbed up body. No, he's a normal guy doing normal things and normal, but finds themselves in very interesting or conflicted situations, and the ability to play that. So, well, let's talk about some of these movies. I guess I'd like to. You can kind of divide some of his work up, his early work, and let's focus first on some of those earlier pictures. You talked about there was, several Academy Awards in some of his earlier work. If we take, I think Bonnie and Clyde in '67 is probably one of the first, significant parts that he was in, up through, I don't know, about the mid 1970s. You've got some very important pictures. Bonnie and Clyde, The French Connection, Poseidon Adventure. He did an interesting role in the movie Young Frankenstein, The Conversation, Night Moves. Some other more interesting that you talked about. I never sang for my father, which was he got some awards for. Movies like Prime Cut and Scarecrow, and Bite the Bullet. Also notable movies during that time frame. I guess that when I look at that time period, as we've talked about, we saw at a young age, Mike, the movie Bonnie and Clyde, and The French Connection was actually, we're talking just a huge, well done, critically acclaimed movie, as well as his role as Popeye Doyle. But to me, the movie that I think the most about during that time period was The Poseidon Adventure, and his very central, very driven role in The Poseidon Adventure. It just comes to me. And whether the reality of a ship that size being able to be capsized and what they do, if it could, it was a very realistic portrayal of someone just trying to do what they could to get a group of people the hell out of that situation. I thought was just very well done by Gene Hackman. An incredible supporting cast,
Yes.
along with him that helped bring that along. But I mean, his character and his just lack of any deterrence to move these people out of that. It always captured me, the drive that he had to, and his belief that he was doing the right thing to have as many people survive as possible was just great, on with the other production value and that type of thing in the movie.
Well, go ahead, Andrew.
Have either of you seen the Gypsy Moths?
I have not seen the Gypsy Moths.
I have not.
Okay, no spoilers. Watch it.
Okay.
Early Gene Hackman, phenomenal performance.
And two movies that I plan on seeing of Gene Hackman's that I have not seen are Scarecrow and Night Moves. And Scarecrow, I mean, I read somewhere that was his favorite role of his career. And I learned about both of those movies from hidden classics you should really check out from the 70s. Both of those films were pointed out. So it's not that I deny their value. I just haven't gotten around to seeing them at this point.
It is one of the things that has occurred since learning of Gene Hackman's death, was kind of going through and looking at his catalog, and it's just, oh my God, I haven't seen that movie. Yeah. I've heard of it. I've you can see the accolades and different things that people have to say about it. It's like, haven't seen it. So I'd like to say I've seen a lot of movies, but there's clearly some in his catalog that I was missing. Looking at the earlier work, Andrew, what sticks out to you as you see some of these films from his earlier days?
I'm going to have to say the Gypsy Moths. I mean, he was in Downhill Racer, had kind of a small part. I'm very fond of that movie. I think it's a great Robert Redford movie. He was in Marooned, which he also had Gregory Peck and Richard Crenna. Who was the third astronaut?
James Franciscus.
Thank you. Yes.
Good 70s actor.
Kind of a disaster movie in a way. God, French Connection, he was obviously so good in that. Night Moves is one of my favorite 70s films of his. And again, no spoilers if Mike hasn't seen it, but he is playing, I'll give away this much, he's a private eye. He's a 2-bit private eye who's in way over his head.
Mm-hmm.
And he does not play it like an I can take anything leading man. He's I'm going to see this through to the end, even though it may kill me.
So now what do you see as there's a lot of talk about The French Connection. That was a movie I didn't see till I was an adult. And looking at the movie, obviously enjoyed the movie. What do you see? Why does that get so much praise, do you think?
Well, his performance was excellent. as the character. I mean, here was sort of a hard-bitten, jaundiced, relatively self-centered guy who was focused
Sure.
on getting the job done and doing what was necessary. And William Friedkin, the director, is I like a lot of his films, not necessarily every one of his films, but I look at him as an excellent classic Hollywood director of the '70s era. And the story, it's an interesting story, and based on a true story. And so there are just a lot of different things that came together. You know, I thought that Roy Scheider's supporting role as the Popeye Doyle's partner was very good. The French bad guy, Fernando Rey, I believe, portrayed him, and that sort of gritty, you know. I mean, just the texture of the film was kind of like, you know, you lick your finger and rub it on the concrete in the subway at New York. It captured that quality. One of the classic car chases in in movie history, and in terms of the how it was portrayed on film and what they had to do to actually make it. There's so many different things that go together in addition to the quality of Gene Hackman's performance as Popeye Doyle that make the French Connection, you know, what it is.
Sure. Now, I guess I'll toss something out there about another Gene Hackman role from that time place, and I'll see if I can get Andrew's goat up here. Right. I look at his role. First of all, I think The Conversation is a great movie. It dives deep into, and they really dig into the actual technical things that are being done to capture these conversations. The whole notion of surveillance and the things that they were doing. They do a very thorough, good job of showing how all this stuff comes together, from the physical field work to the technical things behind, trying to now consolidate all this work into understanding. While that is going on, the kind of coming together of the plot and what's really happening with these people, and how the involvement of these surveillors slowly moves to become a part of that. They aren't just listening. It's a great movie. It's a great story, and it's got an incredible kind of twist at the end. I don't think Gene Hackman's role in that was particularly difficult to do. I look at that as a role that, look, he's a relatively quiet guy, relatively no-nonsense guy that is doing a job, difficult to do. And quite frankly, I see that, although, again, great movie, and there's certainly nothing that you can take away from his performance, but I see a lot of people as being able to step in and do that role.
He played an awkward nerd.
An awkward nerd. So I don't necessarily know that was a great role or performance of his. So I guess that's what I'd pop out there for the crowd.
It was interesting to see him play a subdued character like that. But yeah, I mean, somebody else could have carried that role just as well.
All right. So I've gotten Andrew to say that wasn't a great role for Gene.
I'm not going to go as gently into that good night. I agree with you. I mean, the movie is an excellent movie, and the way that the movie is constructed is in a very literary way. You know, because what's being said between the two, you know, the Cindy Williams and Frederick Forrest characters that he's recording as they're walking through Union Square in San Francisco. You know, just the conversation takes most of the movie to kind of come into focus, and the use of the technology to bring that about is obviously one of the main focuses of the movie. But just the way it's put together, I think that's a good word to describe. It's very literary in the way that the film is structured. And as far as his performance, I don't know if portraying the sort of awkward nerd who is so immersed into the minutia of the technology that is available to be used for purposes of acquiring a recording of two people under circumstances where
without a warrant.
yeah, you can't just take a microphone and stand there. You know, there's other methods that are necessary in order to achieve the objective. And the sort of intense, obsessive focus on those things, you can kind of get that from the character. You know, when he's trying to relax, which he obviously has trouble doing. I mean, one of the scenes that I think is very well done on his part as an actor is when he's playing his saxophone along with the recording, which is something that you know, someone who can kind of play well enough to play along with a record, but not well enough to perform on stage. You know, I know what that feels like. I mean, at one point in my life, I was trying to learn guitar, and I'd been taught some chords by someone else, and I had a guitar, and I was playing it, and that's what I would do. And so I kind of know the sort of the process of trying to be able to do that, and the satisfaction that comes with being able to do that. And that's really about all that this character had going for himself, other than his work bugging people. You know, there's the scene where there's the surveillance convention, and some of the people in that industry come over to his place, and they're having drinks and partying and stuff, and you can kind of tell this is something he wants to do, but he's not really used to doing it, and it's only in these people who he can relate to through the surveillance technology that they all share in common is really the only way he's able to unwind and relax with other people. And the woman who ends up kind of, you know, shanghaiing him so she can steal the tapes, he's interested. I mean, he okay, I can, this girl likes me, or this woman likes me, and but he was being taken advantage of. I think that there's more nuance and subtlety to that character than the way he's not just an awkward nerd. I think it's a more complex character than that.
I no doubt there, and there's also some different, you know, areas where you know, he has to project some tension, like at the end when he realizes he's been bugged, and you know, the effort that he undertakes at the end of the movie. I mean, at first it's, you know, he's kind of thinking of some obvious places, and then realizes this is, you know, and what he ends up working his way through as he becomes more and more desperate. I mean, I'm not saying that the role itself was devoid of, you know, of any type of skill. It was a different type of character that I think went through less, just less emotion that he had to put out there to portray the role, which I think can be some of the most difficult parts of acting. However, let me just say that, you know, that being said, it does demonstrate that ability for him to play all these different types of roles, from these very forceful, commanding, in charge, you know, no indecision whatsoever type roles, to this a quiet nerd type, you know, type role. I just look at this. I think that there was others. When I look at, say, the role he did in the French Connection or the Poseidon Adventure, you know, it's to me, I could see myself playing that role in that, you know, that's maybe one of those I would have had a shot at being able to pull off myself. I guess you could say. So that's how low of a bar it was.
Do you look good in a mustache?
Yeah, well, you know, I don't know if his mustache was ever that good either in some of these roles. But,
well, and you talk about playing different kinds of characters. On some of these earlier films, I guess there's two thoughts I have. Number one, I think one of the things that about his role in Bonnie and Clyde, he played Clyde's brother, and Clyde, you know, who's portrayed by Warren Beatty in the movie, was in some ways kind of shy,
Mm-hmm.
And even though he was very assertive in what he and Bonnie ended up doing, he was
Mm-hmm.
kind of shy, didn't necessarily talk a lot. Had here he had Faye Dunaway, you know, open to him, but he had trouble with intimacy. And then when he hooks up with his brother and Buck Barrow,
Yeah.
Buck shows up and it's Gene Hackman, and he's just as happy go lucky and joking all the time and sort of loud and not self conscious. And it was such a contrast between the brothers, and they obviously loved each other
Mm-hmm.
and were good brothers to each other. But the contrast between the characters, I think, was one of the important aspects to the quality of Hackman's performance in that movie. And then we've talked about the French Connection, and the type of character that he played, and the sort of gritty realism that film was striving for. Whereas the Poseidon Adventure, not necessarily realism. This was entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But the character he played, he was a pastor of some kind. I don't some sort of
Yeah.
ecumenical. He was.
Yeah.
They didn't get into that, but he was a pastor, and one of the scenes where his character is introduced is there's a service that's being provided on board the ship, the Poseidon, and he's just got a much more humanitarian, the kindness, he takes responsibility onto himself for the welfare of others around him. It's a very different character than the French Connection in so many
Mm-hmm.
ways.
Yeah.
And as he's always looking for the half full glass. What can we do? We can either sit around here and feel sorry for ourselves, or we can take action and survive this. And then at the end, the very end before he perishes, where he has to jump over and
Yeah.
turn the valve to close off the steam, so that they can get into this place where they have the best chance of getting out. And he's questioning, it's just, what more, Lord, are you asking of me? And ultimately, I mean, he ends up sacrificing himself, for the betterment of the group of survivors. And he played the role in the Poseidon Adventure just as effectively as he played the different role in the French Connection.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that he should have been nominated for an Oscar, or that the Poseidon Adventure was like Oscar worthy just as a movie. But as far as just his acting ability, it was just as present in that film as it was in the French
Oh,
Connection, in my opinion.
absolutely. And I think that continued as we kind of moved to this more middle phase of his career, kind of the mid 70s and through the 80s. This is where, we saw movies like Hoosiers and The Firm, Superman, Mississippi Burning, A Bridge Too Far comes in there. Kind of this mid period where he was established as a leading man, and he still continued to play some leading roles. Hoosiers is a great example, but he also began to take on some of these roles that were more supporting. The Firm is a good example, or movies that he had a smaller role, but they were in significant larger pictures, such as A Bridge Too Far or Reds, for example. And I mean, myself, I look at this and I think you also mentioned, the enemy of the state, Mike. I mean, at the end of this period, just in like from 86 to like 88, he had like 5 or 6 movies that he did just in that time period. Hoosiers came out in 86, No Way Out, which was him and Kevin Costner.
Two of the movies that you mentioned during this middle period that I think are clearly his best films are Hoosiers and Mississippi Burning. I mean, he was nominated for an Oscar for Mississippi Burning.
Yes.
And I mean, Hoosiers is it's just become a classic American film, and the story, it just has become part of the culture. Not, I mean, kind of like Rudy.
Hmm.
It's a genuine feel good movie with that's very well made and very well acted. Um,
Hmm.
uh, I mean, Gene Hackman's in that film. The Barbara Hershey is in. She's in both Mississippi Burning and Hoosiers.
Hmm.
Um, uh,
Little Dennis Hopper
Dennis
in
Hopper's
Hoosiers.
role in Hoosiers, uh, and A Bridge Too Far was a little earlier. That was late 70s as opposed to
Hmm.
the mid to late 80s. But uh, I mean, there was an example of a supporting role, and the General Sasabowski character in A Bridge Too Far was not a big role, but I you know I read the book A Bridge Too Far by Cornelius Ryan after I'd seen the movie multiple times, and and there's a picture of the real General Sasabowski,
Hmm.
in that book, but I'm reading and I'm thinking of Gene Hackman,
Yeah, yeah.
because
Well, that it was a small role, but it was a critical role because it was one of the few voices of opposition to the plan,
yeah,
which I mean, in the end, proved to be correct.
yeah,
That we're maybe not thinking about everything that we should be here. Plus the fact that not only was he a voice of opposition, but then had to witness the massacre of his men, as in trying to execute his part of the role. So a small role, but a very important one in that movie. And with needing to make that movie with the notion, there was some opposition. It was a critical role in that movie. There's obviously more memorable scenes and actors that played in that movie, but yeah, you needed it to make the movie.
Andrew, what do you think of Hackman's role in A Bridge Too Far?
Well, A Bridge Too Far is an ensemble cast. That's
Hmm.
not a Gene Hackman movie. It's not a Robert Redford movie. It's an ensemble cast. I thought he did a great job as Sasabowski. Um, he was a sympathetic character. Mark was in the military. Confronting your superiors and telling them they're wrong, not an easy thing to do. The scene where he kind of loses it and says, what about the Germans?
Yes,
You
the
don't seem to be
Germans.
factoring them into our plans.
Yeah.
And which, of course, that scene ends with one of the best lines in the movie. In the case of massacre, what difference would it make?
Yep.
I mean, he's kind of like resigned to doing it, even though he really doesn't think it's going to work.
Yes.
So very, very important character in the operation, and very good sympathetic performance by Hackman.
So, and you mentioned Hoosiers as well. I think this is a great example. Hoosiers was a great example of where Gene Hackman was able to thrive. First of all, because of his success as an actor, he obviously had access to good roles. And Hoosiers is a great role where they didn't need, we've talked about this already, that kind of great looking Hollywood leading man to do this well. Yet it was an incredibly well written and well done movie with a great supporting cast. I mean, the way that they were able to weave what is just an interesting, amazing underdog story in, set in a different time and kind of in a different place, and a character that found themselves didn't really want to be there in the first place. They had just kind of fallen back into this role as a high school basketball coach. But the way that they weaved in some of the problems of the town, this star that didn't really want to play basketball, and some of the tension with that, and the tension for him to perform, the way that Dennis Hopper's character was brought in, and the difficulty and trouble that he had, and then with this tension leading up to the championship game. I mean, there was so much about this movie that was good, and he, because of his success to this point, was the perfect type of actor to put into that role. And he certainly executed on it, given that opportunity. I agree with you. It's a great movie. It's anybody that enjoys watching sports movies or these type of things. I mean, that is in the absolute top tier for people to check out.
Um, uh, the and I haven't seen Mississippi Burning in a long time, I saw it when it was still relatively current, or certainly within a few years of when it originally came out. And I so I don't have the sort of nuanced recollection of some of the scenes in that film, but the one I remember is where he steps in with a straight razor to the sheriff, and because he disapproves of the way that the sheriff treats his wife. And he had the ability to he could be a tough guy, without having to be the abs and the pecs and the shirtless leading man. He could still be a tough guy, and in a tough situation. And the way that his character is contrasted with the Willem Dafoe, sort of the more proper federal agent, going by the book and this and that, whereas he's sort of more of the Popeye Doyle, like, look, we got a job we got to get done.
And there's only one way we're going to get it done in Mississippi, right? We're not in Detroit, we're not in Philadelphia, we're not in Washington D.C. We are in Mississippi, and if we're going to get this done, we got to do it. We got to do it this way. And I thought some of his when he was, like, as they were arriving and beginning their conversations with some of the locals in Mississippi, when Gene Hackman was kind of, grabbed himself a beer, and he's kind of drinking this beer, kind of talking with some of the guys to get a. I thought he was just fantastic in the role, and then kind of came to got a game plan about how he was going to make things work that didn't necessarily align with Willem Dafoe, and their interaction was a great part of this movie, and really showing about this is how we're going to get to, and he was right in that one too, right, about how to get things done. Great movie as well, and I also great role for Gene. Now as we move into the later period, and again I've reclassified a little bit here, so I'm gonna look back as we look past the 1990. We've got movies like The Firm and Enemy of the State. Unforgiven was an early 90s movie. The Quick and the Dead. Crimson Tide. Movies like Get Shorty and The Birdcage. The Heist, which we mentioned a little earlier, and then The Royal Tannenbaums. Again, continuing to be, these are all very good movies. These are all Oscar nomination type movies and roles that we have here, and again some very good performances. Myself, I look at this and I see there's kind of two sides of it. I really liked his role in Unforgiven, and the little Bill, the sheriff in this town that became this kind of just exploding point because of this bounty that had been then put by these women who had been harmed, and just a really cold and look at the way things were in the West, and how a lot of the macho bullshit about being out West was just that bullshit. There was a lot that was glorified and glamorized about the West that was not really the case. And I think that the movie itself, Clint Eastwood, directing this movie, did a great job in showing that, and I think he did a great job in that role.
Well, I agree with that, and I mean, we went to see that in Madison, Mark, when it was brand new, when it came out, and it's a tough place in a Clint Eastwood movie, because Clint Eastwood, he tends to dominate the movies that he's in, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's a compliment to Clint Eastwood, not a criticism. But I mean, he tends to dominate, and so when you can sort of capture the moviegoer's attention, to be nominated for Best Supporting Actor, and he won, Gene Hackman won. That's saying something.
Oh, to make an impression when you're in a Western being directed by Clint Eastwood and starring Clint Eastwood, if you're
Yeah.
able to shine in that environment, I say yes. I would say that you've done something.
Yeah.
Yeah, now I'm wondering which one of them had more screen time in that movie, because I'm going to say, please don't send Clint Eastwood over to kick my ass. I'm going to say that Gene Hackman's character was the more memorable of the two from that film.
Mm-hmm. I
Which,
I
if
would
he
agree.
actually had less screen time, is really impressive.
Well, I think that he was so pivotal in what everybody was doing. I mean, you have these people making their way to this town. Clint Eastwood and his crew being one of many that were coming, and then once you got there, the key character in okay, what is going to happen from here? Gene Hackman was deeply a part of everything that happened from that point forward.
Well, and the Clint Eastwood character, so much is hidden because there was, he had a past, and now he was living with his family, and then he ended up going up, because of circumstances that arose to go collect this bounty, and it's not until after Little Bill kills the Morgan Freeman character, as I recall, where the past gunslinger character comes back out, really.
Mm-hmm.
And and so the whereas Gene Hackman's character is sort of the way he is all through it. And so I don't disagree with you, Andrew. In a lot of ways, the character is more memorable because Eastwood was kind of a quiet, reticent guy, and a lot of the people around him, there was the young guy that came along with he and Morgan Freeman. Can't remember the character's name, but the three of them were sort of together, and
the Schofield Kid.
Yeah, and they were doing most of the talking up until towards the end. So that's not necessarily a bad point that Andrew makes, that Little Bill, Gene Hackman's character, was more memorable because there was more going on with him over the course of the whole film to remember.
Any other movies, Andrew, from that kind of later time period that stick out in your mind?
Well, he had a kind of a small supporting role in Geronimo, but I think that's a great movie. It's one of my favorites. Unfortunately, there was a made-for-TV movie about Geronimo, which was on TV like 4 or 5 days before that movie opened in the theaters.
Really?
Who's going to go see it again?
Yeah.
And that's literally, do you want to go see the movie about the
thing we just saw on TV?
For free?
Yeah.
Very, very good film, I think. Wes Studi plays Geronimo. He's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And Gene Hackman has a small role, but he's good. I mean, he's Gene Hackman. He did another film right around that time.
Well, I liked his there's two movies. First of all, again, these are not top 5 movies of Gene Hackman's or whatever, but I thought that they were very good movies that he played an important role in. One of them was Get Shorty, which was just an incredibly entertaining movie, and I think he did a great role. He did a great job just being kind of this, he tries to watch the John Travolta character, and then he tries to do the same thing and act the same way when a real gangster comes to town and he gets the shit beat out of him because he's such a doofus. I mean, he does a great job in that. And then the other one is The Birdcage, which again, also an incredibly entertaining movie, and not you almost could have done, that there was so much with the interaction, between Robin Williams and his partner in there, and just all of it that was just amazing and really took center stage. But Gene Hackman's role as the uptight conservative senator, I mean, he just did a great job with that. Again, not a main character, in a relatively small character, but what the squares that he did have to hit, he nailed it, especially when he realized that this entire time he'd been talking to a man, and he was just like, wait, I don't understand. I mean, he nailed it. He just, he nailed that part, and really at the conclusion of an entertaining movie, which, as I think we've talked about a couple times, that ability to take control of a movie and really drive and really carry an entire movie, or the ability to really contribute in these smaller parts just throughout his entire career was just pretty incredible. Yeah.
The Quick and the Dead was in that time period.
Oh, absolutely.
Great cast. A young Leonardo DiCaprio, Sharon Stone, Gary Sinise. That was Hackman's movie.
Mm-hmm.
His character is that movie.
And it's kind of interesting. I mean, that was kind
of a nice person.
No. But it is kind of interesting, the different types of movie, Unforgiven versus The Quick and the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, The Quick and the Dead is really, okay, here we're going to have this like shootout tournament. I mean, again, kind of glamorizing some of this stuff, these shootout things. And, it's the people that can shoot the fly off the horse's ear with this equipment that can't shoot that accurate anyway. That type of movie compared to Unforgiven, which was really trying to show the exact opposite about the West. And again, I think Gene Hackman played a very good character in both movies.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I would agree with you. I mean, that although there were a number of stars and obviously good actors that were in that movie, his role was the most significant in The Quick and the Dead.
From the later era that you've referred to, I mentioned I liked his role, the role that he played in the movie The Firm.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one of the partners who was the most disturbed by the corruption that was, or the illegal activities that the firm was involved in. But at heart he was an aggressive lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
and that was how he approached most things. And then the way that he kind of took Tom Cruise under his wing, there were just a number of different aspects of that, and the fact that when he's trying to seduce Tom Cruise's wife, he even is conflicted about that. I mean, there was a conflicted nature of that character that I thought he did very well. The movie as a whole was a Tom Cruise type movie more so than a Gene Hackman type movie.
Yeah.
And Crimson Tide, I would probably have to say is my favorite of Gene Hackman's movies from that later period. I mean, the Unforgiven role gets, that's where he won the Academy Award, and I think
Sure.
that's going to get more attention, with his movies in the 90s and the early 2000s. But I thought his role in Crimson Tide was very well done for some of the reasons that you described, when we were talking earlier. Because while he's more willing to err on the side of shoot first and ask questions later, contrary to the approach that the Denzel Washington character takes, it's not a simplistic, there's more to it. The reasons why he ends up taking that position are more complex than just that. And that's a great movie. I mean, in terms of the, like kind of Tom Clancy type thriller, that's a good one. And
absolutely.
And there's good acting by a number of the other members of the cast, in my opinion. And
but they really, how people act under incredible pressure, and they're in a very time sensitive situation. They don't have all the facts, and they understanding that the decisions that they make are going to have potentially incredible ramifications, including the killing of tens of millions of people. Yeah. I mean, talk about being in a situation where you are under pressure, and I think that to your point, very good cast who all did a good job. And I would say he did an incredible job being the commander of the ship. Ultimately the pressure was on him throughout the entire time, even after command was taken away from him. You look at a character like the XO that takes control. He can always say, I inherited a fucked up situation, right? The captain didn't, handle it. And Gene Hackman, though, from the beginning, it's like, this is my command. And he was under the most pressure.
And he shows it.
And yes. And he does a great job of showing it.
And so not only has he got all this pressure of do you or don't you launch nukes, then that's a tough enough thing to explain.
Sure.
Why did you launch nuclear missiles? Or why didn't you launch nuclear missiles? I lost control of my boat.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh,
Well, and that's
want to explain that one to us?
the you are talking about a situation where, okay, problem one is, do we or do we not launch these missiles? That's problem number one, which is probably the most significant type of question that any field military commander could be faced with.
Yes.
That number two, how do I maintain control of this ship now that it's clear that things are starting to unravel? I'm starting to get direct confrontation from my XO. And again, you can look at this, and I think that there's a general just feeling in watching the movie and the way that it's written that it's like, maybe Denzel had the right point here. It seems like the way that they portray it is that, especially the way that they show the Gene Hackman character letting his dog kind of piss on the ship and that type of stuff. I think that they're trying to say that he might be a little, unempathetic of what is actually happening. I'm not saying that he was. You just kind of get that sense that it's like you're pulling a little bit for Denzel Washington as you're watching as the way that they lay out the movie. I get the sense that they're trying to do that. That doesn't mean that Denzel Washington was right. I agree with the assessment of the court martial or the review team or whatever you want to call that at the end, that it's like you were both right and you were both wrong. That's what we have here. And but so this nuclear launch, I'm losing control of my ship. How do I respond to that? He doesn't get to stop worrying about the first one while he's worrying about the second one. And then when he's lost command, how do we affect now moving back into command? What do we have to do to take control of the situation? Because he's still worried about the first problem,
right?
About these missiles. I mean, just an incredible level of pressure. And he was under all of these. I think a great role. Great story, great role.
I did not buy the dog thing. I thought that was an unnecessary thing they added to his character, not Hackman's fault.
Yes. Clearly what they were trying to do. I mean, there was other things too there, though. The calling the drill in the middle of a fire. Again, questionable, I think, on yes, his point of we have to be able to do these things under pressure, but I think that they were trying to show some questionable judgment
Sure, yeah.
of his ahead of time. And some of that, again, that drill, again, can you see the argument? We need to test ourselves under pressure. On the same token, I mean, you do have a life or death situation that potentially, anyway, it's I think that there was a couple things that they were trying to.
Well, they balanced Denzel Washington's character versus Gene Hackman's character really well.
Yes. Yep.
Because you can argue, hey, I want to train my crew to operate under extreme pressure, and there might be a fire on board when we're trying to execute a mission.
Yes.
And Denzel Washington is sitting there saying, I'm sorry, I thought a fire on board was a crisis.
Yeah.
You can look at it both ways and say, I get why you want to exploit the crisis for training, and I get why you want to say a crisis is training.
Yes. Yeah, well, exactly.
The George Dunsda character in the film where he disapproves of the way that Denzel Washington chose to handle a situation, but he acknowledges the fact that, look, you were right to the extent that the captain cannot fire the missiles without your concurrence.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of stuck in this sort of purgatory of, okay, well, look, here's what the captain has determined needs to be done. Denzel Washington is saying we do not have a complete communication. We cannot launch nuclear missiles based on a partial communication. I do not concur. And so in terms of military protocol or military law or the rules of the ship, or however you characterize it, it's like, no, we can't launch the missiles until the executive officer concurs. Well, now what are we going to do? And is that insubordination by refusing to concur? I mean, the executive officer has their own authority, but you're on a submarine. someone's got to have final say in terms of the chain of command and whatnot. But blah blah blah. It really was a well set up dilemma for the characters to face for purposes of the movie. I thought,
and I think using art to shine a light on something that is, something that hopefully people, whether it be in military leadership or in the civilian leadership of our military, is thinking about. It's one thing to say, well, the way that we're going to prevent somebody from going rogue is we're going to have two people concur, but what happens when they don't concur? I mean, it's much like, we're going a couple decades earlier in a movie like War Games,
Yes.
where they address the question, what happens when the people that we're expecting to push the button don't push the button?
No.
So interesting problems to grapple with. And I think that the movie did a good job. And Gene Hackman, again, one of my favorite roles of his. Now, why don't we talk about real quickly some movies where Gene Hackman? What are some of the underrated roles or movies that that they had? And I know, again, as we talked about, there's leading roles and there's supporting roles, but kind of taking all that into account, we've certainly heard over the last couple weeks, in getting the news of his death, about a lot of the movies that people thought were great movies. What are some movies that, maybe pick one movie that you think that isn't getting some of the credit that it deserves, or is a more underrated movie of Gene's? How about you, Andrew?
This is me being subjective. March or Die, 1977, same year as A Bridge Too Far. He plays an American who's an officer in the French Foreign Legion. I'm the target market. I mean, it's just
This movie. Wait a second. This is the French Foreign Legion. This is an American. Yes, I can see that this drew you to it.
Yes, very good supporting cast, but Gene Hackman plays a combat veteran. He's seen way too much death. He realizes he's never going to get promoted pretty much above his current rank. Doesn't deal with people well, doesn't play well with others. And then gets put into a situation where, once again, he's kind of like looking at his superiors saying, do you not see how hopeless this is?
Mm-hmm.
You're expecting me to succeed here? And then the climactic battle scene is absolutely phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of my Gene Hackman guilty pleasure movies. I think I'm one of 12 people who saw it, but
well, I'll tell you, I haven't seen it, and it's now made my list. So
Amazon Prime has it for free.
There we go. We'll be checking that one out. That's going to be on my list pretty quick here. The movie from 1983, Under Fire. Is I think that doesn't get in his, there's people that have seen it and there's people that, but it never seems to come into these top, 20 or 30 Gene Hackman movie conversations. Gene was not the star. It was Nick Nolte was truly the star of the movie, but Gene Hackman played a very important role. He was kind of the network news anchor who was also the husband of the reporter that Nick was bawling down in Nicaragua while they were on his thing, and he ends up getting shot down there, which it's kind of a based on
a true story.
True events of an American journalist being shot in South America, which raised the elevation and attention to what was going on there. Ed Harris was also in the movie, plays just an interesting mercenary, just kind of a quacky kind of guy who ends the movie looking over at Nick Nolte saying, "Hey, I'll see you in Thailand." Anyway, I think that it deserves a little bit more credit. Gene Hackman's role, he did a great job in the role, and I think it's an interesting movie as well.
Quickly on Under Fire, which I haven't seen, my understanding is that that's kind of a similar movie to Oliver Stone's Salvador with
Yes.
James Woods. And that movie came from a very left-wing perspective, consistent with the character. And it sounds to me like Under Fire was a similar story from more of a right-wing perspective.
The El Salvador's great movie. The James Wood character in that number of scenes, and with Jim Belushi as well in that movie. A different kind of slant and way that they were portrayed, but absolutely, it's like, let's dig a little bit into a conflict, south of the border that a lot of people weren't necessarily paying attention to. But very good movie. How about you, Mike? Any particular underrated Gene Hackman plays?
And maybe underrated isn't the right label, but I would say underappreciated, because you don't hear too much about it. Is I Never Sang for My Father, and I don't I don't think it was Gene Hackman's greatest role, but I definitely think it was worthy of the Academy Award nomination, and that's from 1970. So he had not established himself. This was shortly before The French Connection, and even though he'd gotten, this was his second Oscar nomination, so he was on the radar screen, but he just had not established himself in the public consciousness as a whole. The movie-going public, as opposed to people that were more directly involved in the film industry, and it's a very interesting story. It's an adult man who had always locked horns with his father, and loved his father, but
none of us can relate to that.
But but they were never able to connect. Is really the bottom line, and he wanted that to happen, and just the way the story plays out, and he's always trying to make that connection with his father, and he never gives up. But towards the end, his mother, his father's wife, passes away. Things become difficult for his father. His father is getting older, and it's getting to the point where just leaving him to live in the big house that the family had lived in wasn't really a viable option. He goes and looks at some nursing homes, and they're very starkly depicted in the film, and he's really kind of shocked by it, and he's like, no, we're not going to send my father to a place like that. And in the end, I mean, he can't at the end. He wants to marry a woman who lives in California, and to go out and live with her and become the stepfather to her children. And he asked his father to come with him. Mm-hmm. We come out to California. We'll find a place for you to live, and this and that. And the father, I live here, and why are you going out there? You need to stay here. And it's a very poignant scene, very well done by both. Melvin Douglas plays Gene Hackman's father, and just excellent performances by both of those actors in the film. And he says, Dad, I'm asking you to come with me. I'm not abandoning you. I wanted you to come with me. And but you, at the same time, you also get the sense is Gene Hackman, doing this out of love, or more out of a sense of duty. And that ambiguity isn't necessarily cleared up by the end of the film, and so there's a lot of nuance in the way that Gene Hackman is able to portray this conflicted relationship with his father, and even though it got an Academy Award nomination in 1970, it just, you don't hear about it that often, and I think it's an excellent Gene Hackman performance, and I think any son who has a father will get something out of this movie.
Sounds good. Okay, why don't we flip the coin? Overrated Gene Hackman movies, and again, he's obviously done well in a lot of movies. I think there's a few along the way, though, that I think get a little bit more hype than it deserves. Would anybody want to go first? I will. I can as well.
I think since you asked the question, why don't you have at it, Mark?
Well, to me, the I'm going to leave the easiest one. I'll go with it. I think that Superman is probably his most overrated role. I'm not saying that he didn't do a good job in the movie, as Lex Luthor in the movie. It just, again, in thinking about Gene Hackman, or over the last couple of weeks, kind of reading through and looking through some of his movie accomplishments, Superman always seems to end up in these top 10 lists of Gene Hackman movies and Gene Hackman roles, and I don't see it. I think that myself personally, I've always felt that some of these first swipes at superhero movies, and I'm talking back in the 70s and 80s, the early Batman flicks, this movie, they didn't do a very good job with the villains. I don't think so. I look at the Joker character played by Jack Nicholson in the original Batman, and then I compare that to some of the more current Joker portrayals that they have. I think the ones nowadays, or the more recent ones, are just much better portrayals of the criminal mind, the type of person that would be doing this. And I absolutely felt the same thing in the Superman movie, and wasn't a huge fan of the Lex Luthor characters that seem to get a lot of praise. So that's what I'll put out there as my first call as one of his more overrated roles.
The a movie that I liked, I thought it was a decent movie, very entertaining, suspenseful film, was No Way Out with Kevin Costner, and it wasn't that Gene Hackman did a poor job acting, but the character just did not have the presence and sort of the force. I mean, he was kind of in the background in that movie, and the other characters just seemed to kind of overpower his character, and that's not his fault, but that's something, because the movie is good, and so the movie gets good reviews, and it's pointed out that he's in it, but that was not the best movie to showcase Gene Hackman's talents, in my opinion.
I'd agree. I'd also say, I mean, there were some elements. The movie was an entertaining movie. It was one of the earlier, maybe the earliest Kevin Costner movie. So very early Kevin Costner movie. I felt anytime you have these situations where you have a young lieutenant who seems to be in such incredible conflict and interaction with someone at the level of like the Secretary of Defense, I always wonder, we may be stretching reality here a little bit. But especially weren't they sleeping with the same woman? In that
therein lies the rub.
Exactly, and so there's I see some of these things that people in these types of positions that I do think that it was a good movie, and I'd agree with you. It's not that there was anything that was that it looked at like he blew that role or whatever. Just nothing really significant about it that stood out about how Gene Hackman played that particular character. Right?
He usually brings
not a bad movie, but
he usually brings something more distinctive to the characters that he plays in a way that's more memorable than this film.
Gotcha. How about you, Andrew? Anywhere where you thought that his roles were overrated?
Well, I mean, he did a number of movies which I think are just absolutely awful. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Lucky Lady was absolutely dismal. The Domino Principle, that wasn't particularly worth watching.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't think anybody liked those movies either.
Yeah.
So it's not like people are
not necessarily overrated, but it's a good thing that they weren't rated at all.
I'm trying to think. I'm on board with the ones you guys mentioned.
Not an easy task, because
no, not really.
To your point, there were some movies that were just clunkers, as any actor that has starred in a lot of movies has found themselves from time to time.
You guys got to eat.
Especially when you're all going to be working, but not a whole lot of them that you look at that got a claim that they didn't originally deserve. So if we go back around and focus, why don't we just to kind of wrap things up? Why don't we just go around the horn here? Maybe we'll each let's pick a favorite Gene Hackman, what you think his best work was. So I'm talking more about like his best role. And I guess the only thing that I'd ask is that we not repeat movies. Let's spread this out a little bit. So, Mike, why don't you start? What was your favorite Gene Hackman role? And we can each toss out two here and just say a few words about why it was so memorable to you.
The first two movies that come to mind immediately when you ask that question are the French Connection and the Poseidon Adventure. Not that the Poseidon Adventure was as really good an acting performance as I think some of his other roles were, such as like The Conversation, for example. But after just sort of pondering it, for a couple minutes, I'm going to go with Hoosiers, and because we were talking about this. It's a good film. It makes you feel good. And he portrays that character in a way that's so believable. And, the person who's trying to make the best of a situation that he didn't choose. The Dennis Hopper character, he kind of wants to come in and help him. And even though he has the boys' best interest, the team members' best interest in mind, he gets himself kicked out of games as sort of something where Dennis Hopper can use that opportunity to have some glory for himself and just to kind of let him learn like the way he's teaching the boys. And it's not my favorite of his movies as a movie. And I don't think it's the best movie that he ever made or necessarily his top performance, but I could, and I'm not necessarily a big basketball fan as that kind of thing goes. But I like the movie. I like the way he plays the character. There is, as you said at the very beginning, there's just a fatal flaw in there. He's got a hot temper and he likes to do things his way, but he manages to channel those things in a way that provides such a good result for this community that he's in and the boys that he's coaching. It's hard for me not to pick that as my favorite Gene Hackman role.
Well, certainly near the top of my list as well. No argument there. Andrew, what would you put up on top?
I guess I'm going to go for the low-hanging fruit and go with Bonnie and Clyde because I love that movie and he's great in it. To take something slightly less easy, Night Moves. I mean, I like Uncommon Valor. I like March or Die. Those are good action-type war movies with great performances by Gene Hackman. But to appeal to a slightly wider audience, Bonnie and Clyde that's an American icon movie.
Sure.
You have to see that movie or we revoke your citizenship.
Sure.
And then Night Moves is a very underrated Gene Hackman movie. He's, as I said earlier, he plays like a two-bit second-rate detective who gets handed a real case. Great performance.
So it's interesting. Uncommon Valor, which I would agree was a good movie. I think that it got kind of washed together with a bunch of kind of Vietnam,
Chuck Norris movies.
Exactly. There was just kind of a flood of some of these things that all seemed to come out around the same time period, and they all, looking back, they all kind of flowed together. In fact, you sometimes, was that,
Rambo 2,
exactly.
Missing in Action 2, Missing in Action 3.
Yeah, these and all these sequels and continuing to really roll off this same topic. And quite frankly, I mean, I'd put that closer to the top of the heap of these movies than a lot of the other ones. But probably another one that is underrated because of that as well. Okay, but you're going Bonnie and Clyde is your first picks there. I would put as my if looking back, and there's other movies that I enjoy watching, but looking at his roles and going all the way back, I'd have to go to the French Connection. I would say if Hoosiers was still on the table, I would have taken that. Again, wonderful role, wonderful movie that just stands out. I mean, more people are watching Hoosiers right now, years later, than are watching The French Connection. That doesn't mean I still see that though as kind of his first just real. Bonnie and Clyde was a very good movie and a very good role, especially for an incredibly young actor and without as much experience. I think that brought him to the table, and I think that the French Connection planted his seat where they put his name on one of the chairs with the French Connection. So I'll go with that. Mike, give us one more.
Um. Uh. I liked The Conversation. I thought I liked the way the movie was put together, and it was written, produced, and directed all by Francis Ford Coppola, and just the way it's put together, it's put together like a really good literary novella, where just as information comes in, you're trying to figure out what's going on, and then it doesn't really come into focus until the very end. Usually something entirely different than what may have been led up to. And as I said, I think that his acting performance was really good. I mean, it wasn't necessarily, in my opinion, it wasn't a particularly easy role to play. And it was kind of sophisticated. I mean, the contrast between the focused tech nerd and the saxophone player who was into jazz. I just not that there aren't plenty of people like that, but and little fun fact about The Conversation: it was nominated for Best Picture, didn't win, but one of the actors is John Cazale. And John Cazale, who died young, was in 5 movies. And all 5 of them were nominated for Best Picture. And 3 of them won. He was in The Conversation. He was in The Godfathers Part 1 and 2, both of which won Best Picture. He was in Dog Day Afternoon, which was nominated, and then he was in The Deer Hunter, which was nominated and won. Those were the 5 movies he was in. So 5 movies, all 5 got nominated for Best Picture, and 3 of them won.
Yeah, great batting percentage for him. And there is some. I mean, we talked earlier on, and that we weren't going to see any more Gene Hackman movies anyway. That doesn't change the tragedy of his death, and we'll mourn that loss. But we were done with Gene Hackman movies. With John, though, who knows what could have come from that? I mean, for someone who was starting in their career, and also an understanding that, I mean, people loved working with that guy. Maybe someone that dies young, there might be, but I mean, there was a very positive feedback about the guy. Was a great actor.
His girlfriend was Meryl Streep. I mean, when he died, it's like her companion died.
Who some people consider a very good actress.
I'd say that was a justified position.
Well, interesting is an interesting fact, and we could have an episode just on John. But so Andrew, now is your number 2 Night Moves? Is that what your Night Moves? In for that. Myself, I'll close out with, and again, this is difficult, but I am going to pick for the final selection here, Crimson Tide. We've looked at some of the older movies that he did that kind of got himself going, some from that midterm, but I really think that Crimson Tide was a real cap on his ability to play people encountering difficult situations and their reaction to it. Lot more movies on the list of his movies that I would happily and gladly sit down and watch again, and a few more, as we've talked about, that I still need and want to see. But I would close out that as that. What's that, Andrew?
The Gypsy Moths.
The Gypsy Moths, another one that is now going on the list.
Burt Lancaster's in that as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I've already got Scarecrow and Night Moves down as movies I intend to watch, and I'll add that to it.
Sounds good. Well, really difficult news to hear about Gene passing. Hope that they can, that all that gets wrapped up, and kind of just some interesting and kind of confusing, situation around that. Either way, he was a great actor who did a lot of stuff. Any final thoughts, Andrew?
He was officially retired. So,
Yes.
like you said, we were not going to see any more of his movies. But I mean, his body of work is incredible. I mean, I'm looking at his IMDb list right now, and there are movies on it I have never seen.
Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, get to work.
Yeah.
Final thoughts, Mike?
He made it to 95, and that's a pretty good run.
Yes.
And his body of work is going to survive, and people for however, we don't know how many years, how many decades, or even centuries into the future, people are going to continue to enjoy and get things from his work. And may he rest in peace. But potentially his memory will live forever. As long as we can watch stuff on screens, people are going to know about Gene Hackman.
Absolutely. Well, great closing thought and great conversation, guys, about an amazing actor. And we will catch everybody the next time.